Good afternoon. This is Rich Nass with Open Systems Media, and I'm here for the first installment of an ongoing series that I'll be speaking to Ray Zinn, who is the former founder of Micrel. If you're not familiar with Ray, he has a fantastic story to tell, and over the series of these interviews, we'll be unraveling that story. But I'd like to start just by introducing Ray and going through a bunch of questions with him so you get a feel for what his background is and why we're actually doing these talks. So with that, hello, Ray. How are you today?
I'm fine. Thank you for asking, Rich.
My pleasure. Okay, so you were the CEO of Micrel. I believe it was for 37 years. Is that true?
That is correct. 37 years, started in November of 1978.
Okay, so let's go back to before that. What were you doing before you had the inspiration to start up Micrel?
I was working for a company called Electromask, and so if you go back a little earlier than that, I started in the semiconductor industry in 1963 at Fairchild in Mountain View, and that's about 7 years after, or 6 years actually, after the industry actually began in 57 with Bob Noyce and his guys. And so the industry is relatively new and needed a lot of support. And so that was my background, was to start as an engineer at Fairchild in 1963, developing actually equipment for the industry. And so then in 1973, I think it was, or 74, I joined Electromask. That was the last company before founding Micrel, and they were a manufacturer of semiconductor photomask equipment. That's the equipment that images the devices onto the wafers, or on actually creating the device itself. So toward the end of my career at Electromask in the, say, 76, 75 time frame, I came up with the idea of the wafer stepper, which is still used today, but it's a little early when they needed it. I was shooting for 435 nanometer, and of course the industry really only needed about 2 microns in those days. And also the stepper needed to have large wafers. In other words, to step directly from the reticle to the wafer required a larger wafers, otherwise it wasn't cost effective. So my idea, ultimately you had to have large wafers, and in those days the wafers were like 3 inches, maybe going to 4 inch. And so it was way before its time. And that gave me problems with my management, and they thought that the wafer stepper was a dumb idea, mainly because there wasn't a lot of support technology for lithography below a micron, and so I was kind of a little ahead of my time, as you would, and as a consequence, they basically said, you really don't fit in well with a company. You ought to go out on your own because you don't seem to stay within the corporate guidelines of what we want to do. We're here trying to make money, and you're thinking way outside the box. So I left in July of 1976 and kind of bumped around trying to figure out what to do, what kind of company to start. I went home after I got terminated from Electromask, told my wife, I said, I'm never going to work for anybody ever again. I'm done. I've had it. And I'm tired of getting fired, and so she said, okay, no problem, but I know you'll do something right. So it took me about a year or two to figure out what was the best approach for me going forward, and that's how I came up with Micrel. Actually, started much earlier because it takes some time to develop the corporate infrastructure, so it took me about 5 or 6 months to get the company organized, to raise the money, which you're going to talk about in the subsequent segment. But anyway, the concept of the company was to start a company that really did not require venture capital, and so I had to raise bank debt, and that took me some time to do that because the banks weren't really interested in funding a startup and that was a real challenge for me to have to overcome. So, but we opened the doors in November of 1978, and Micrel was born.
What did you do for income in the meantime, from the time you left the previous company to the time that you founded Micrel?
Good question. So, Rick, I had a nest egg. I made some pretty good money. That was the other reason they forced me out at Electromass, because I had a pretty lucrative contract with them. It didn't sound lucrative in the beginning because it was all commission, but because I did so well in sales for them, that I was making actually more money than the president of our company. And in fact, in those days, if you can appreciate in the early to mid 70s, I was making over $200,000 a year. So that was pretty good for someone in that time frame. And so I saved some money. I bought some real estate and invested well. It was during the boom time of real estate, so I had a little bit of a nest egg that I could use, and so I basically just lived off of that for 2 years. I didn't draw a salary at all from basically June of 1976 until probably 1980. The company is still new in those days, a little over a year, 2 years old, before I even drew a salary. So I had to go without a salary for, close to 3.5, 4 years.
Very interesting. I find it fascinating the number of people who've come out of Fairchild to lead other companies, especially in Silicon Valley.
Yeah, of course, Fairchild in those days was the birthplace of many companies like Intel and National and AMD and AMI and myriads of others in the valley. So you're correct. They did spawn a lot of startups.
Okay, so we're almost out of time for this segment, but there is something that I feel I should bring up, and I hope you're comfortable talking about it. But I recently learned that you have a vision impairment. Would you talk about that a little bit?
Okay, so in 1968, I had a retina vein occlusion in my left eye that cost me my eyesight in my left eye. Basically, that's like a stroke in your eye. But the doctor told me that we have two eyes, so there's no problem. You can live with just having one eye. And so I went on life. I had to adjust for the lack of vision in my left eye, but went on to a very productive life and actually became a pilot. Owned a couple airplanes. Became an IFR pilot, as a matter of fact. But in December 1994, when I was in London on the roadshow taking the company public, I noticed that the menu that I was reading was blurry, and pieces of it were missing. And I turned to my friend next to me and I said, "Let me look at your menu. Maybe your menu is more clear than mine." And looked at his menu, and his menu was just as bad as mine. So I said, "Well, I got something going on here." So that was in the evening of December 1994, and so I went to bed, woke up, and noticed while I was shaving that everything was foggy. So I tried to wipe the fog off the mirror, and it wouldn't go away, and I said, "Wow, something's going on." So called my wife and tried to get back home as quick as I could, but so my right eye became occluded and or had a stroke in it. And they say that's like 1 in 10 billion for that to happen. So lightning striking twice in the same place happened to me. So I ended up with retina vein occlusion in both eyes. So my vision went to 2400 almost overnight, and I had to finish the roadshow basically blind.
And you've never had it change since then? You're in the same condition now?
Well, it's improved some. So the blood has subsided. And my vision right now is about 2120, which is, you need 2040 or something like that to drive. So I can't drive, and I can't read real well because, with vision over 2100 is not good enough for reading. So I have to have magnification. Thank goodness for the new tablets and the new smart iPhones or smartphones that allow you to magnify things. So as long as I can magnify things, I can see okay. So I'm getting by, and most people don't even know that I'm legally blind.
Yeah, like I said, I did not know that. Okay, so we're going to wrap up here for the first installment, and this will be a weekly series with Ray Zinn, the former founder of Micrel, who's written a book called Tough Things First. And I'll reference that book in a lot of these interviews. So thank you, Ray, and I look forward to talking with you next week.
Thank you so much, Rick. Appreciate that.